we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. On infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections.
If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious.
Violence and vandalism is being led by Antifa and other radical left-wing groups who are terrorizing the innocent, destroying jobs, hurting businesses, and burning down buildings. They are coming after me because I am fighting for you. That's what's happening.
Greetings, fellow thought criminals, and thank you for joining the insurrection. I'm Michael Lauber, and today I'm joined by Andrew Mahler from the New American. How you doing this morning, Andrew?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here with you as always.
Well, thank you for joining as always. And man, there's never a dull day anymore, even when it does appear to be a slow news day. There's always something going on. And this is something we touched on earlier this week when we had a Right Side Rebel on, but now we have confirmation. Facial recognition confirms Delaney Hall agitators were at both the Minnesota and Portland anti-ICE riots. And I think a number of them were also there in Chicago when that was really heating up a few, kind of when, as Minnesota was easing down a little bit, a lot of them showed back up in Chicago. So, I mean, this proves that a lot of these are paid agitators, that they are not locals coming out. And the arrest reports indicate the same thing, depending on which night you look at. Somewhere between 70 and 90% of the people arrested did not reside in New Jersey. This is, manufactured dissent. It's designed to create this idea that all of America is upset about mass deportations or deportations in general, when in reality it is a small minority. But again, I think most of us already knew that, but now we have a kind of confirmation.
Yes, it's a very significant story, and I've talked about this on the program, and it's worth giving it another plug. The John Birch Society created a documentary many years ago called Anarchy USA, and in it they described this very tactic of what they call pressure from above and pressure from below, where you have pressure from above, which would be the politicians, the academic, thinkers, the think tanks, the NGOs, whatever, institutional pressure,
Yes.
to, have race politics or, civil rights, but, it's actually communism, whatever it may be. That is what they push from above. And then they have pressure from below. And these are the paid agitators, the rent-a-mobs, the Antifas, etc. And these are not organic, natural, displays of opinion, right? It's just not what it is. If that was the case, not all of them would be violent, right? Which all these are. They all have the same set of characteristics, which is violence, plunder, masking identities, anonymous individuals, etc. So this has been a tactic since the civil rights era and before, of having that pressure from above, pressure from below. And, as a journalist with the Liberty Sentinel and the New American, I've gone to a lot of UN summits, and they even do this same thing in a more, civilized manner, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Like Greta Thunberg, right? They'll do these very scripted, the UN will, these very scripted displays of public outrage. In Azerbaijan, or not Azerbaijan, in Balaim at the last COP summit I went to, they moved the police away from the doors and allowed all these aboriginals to bust open the doors and storm in and demand climate justice. None of that was organic, right?
No.
There are 8 security checkpoints with Brazilian armed tank vehicles and machine
Yeah.
guns and all this stuff before the door the Indians kicked in. There's no way they actually were able to do that with little sticks and rods. So this sort of tactic is prevalent in politics. And when you see the same people at one stop and then another stop, they're either the most dedicated, um, you know, uh,
Yeah.
activists you ever see in your life, or they're paid protesters, and it's obviously the latter.
Yeah, I mean it's kabuki theater. It's and the other problem with this is the fourth estate, the media refuses to do their job and said they go along with it and they push the propaganda that the deep state wants. They could have easily done this same research. I'm sure they've seen these reports before saying, well, hey, these are the same agitators showing up there and being arrested in all these cities and point that out, but they don't. They ignore that part of the story. They pretend that it is organic, that it's, the locals rising up everywhere. But that's not the truth. And that creates a false perception and thus, again, I think does massive harm to our republic because people are not informed. Again, if we could fix the media and just get some honest reporting out of them, I don't think our country would be in nearly as bad a shape as it is right now. But they are not there to inform. They are there to propagandize in a certain direction and push for the outcome that they want. We've got these riots kicking off still up in New Jersey. They haven't slowed down. And the only reason I think they haven't gotten more out of control is praise the Lord, New Jersey's police are actually making some arrests there. Probably, not to the level still where, I'd be totally happy with it, but they are arresting the people that get violent, that attack journalists, that do other things, that they've swept up, done whole sweeps several times now, brought in 60 plus agitators once they get violent and start throwing things and assaulting either the police or the ICE operatives or vehicles. So, at least we have some pushback there and some arrests happening, but it's still, a lot of these people should be charged with federal crimes, pulled off the street, and put in jail for years. And another thing I keep going back to is, what's the point of declaring Antifa a terrorist organization if we're not really going to enforce it? A lot of these people could be hauled off in jail, charged under those laws, and they wouldn't be a problem for the next 5 years. But we're not utilizing the power that we have. And for as bad as things are in New Jersey, I think things are about to kick off down in Texas, too, because of this Carmelo Anthony trial. Let me go ahead and pull this up here real quick. Defense lawyer suggests Austin Metcalf may have impaled himself on Carmelo Anthony's knife. I don't know why I can't say that this morning. Now, this comes out after we heard about how just the defense has no case down there. Even their witnesses admitted that Carmelo Anthony instigated this, that he started the fight, he was where he wasn't supposed to be, that he bears responsibility for this murder. Not to mention I think it was 21 witnesses that the prosecution brought in, all confirmed the same thing. They all told the same story. And then there's the video evidence and everything else on top of that. It sounds like this guy's going down, but you have this group of insane protesters outside of the court that they say, well, even if the evidence shows he's guilty, we've got to protect our own. Well, that mentality is anti-American. We have to actually have equal justice, equal protection under the law. We can't be making decisions one way or another based on somebody's skin color in the courtroom. This mentality's got to go. But unfortunately, it's embraced by a lot of these, radical leftist agitators on the street, the race hustlers and poverty pimps. And I think in this case, he's almost certainly going to be convicted, and they're going to have riots on the streets afterwards. But it's Texas, so I don't think they're going to go quite the way the left hopes they will.
Yeah, it's insane. We see these, revisionist history cases that go to court where they change these things. It's purely politically motivated.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is unacceptable. You can't allow this to happen. And unfortunately, this whole, race politics that's behind so many of these incidences is becoming so prevalent. And it really is. I don't think people understand this. Commentators say it from time to time, but this really is the new version of, Marxism. Instead of having
Yeah.
the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, it's the blacks versus the whites, the Jews versus the Gentiles, the thises versus the that's. That's the new form of Marxism. And unfortunately, as things happen, across the world where there are acts of racial violence in the Western world now, it's going to become more and more effective. And we have to deal with the issue as it is a real issue, right? Where there's obviously a violent tendency, not for everyone, but against, some Sikhs versus, whites.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've seen that happen. So we have to handle that, but we can't allow it to become a new Marxist fracture point in our country so that they can, usher in their agenda to destroy the West.
Yeah, we really do have to get this violent leftist mob under control here and around the world because they're exacerbating existing tensions. But I think most of these would largely have gone away if it weren't for our media, again, downplaying it when whites are attacked and then feeding into this narrative when it's somebody of a different race or different religion or whatever, act like it's the end of the world. Again, the attack should be condemned, but it's not a level playing field. It's about generating a narrative and sowing more discontent and dissent within the country. That they want as much friction as humanly possible. They want us divided, and they're succeeding, unfortunately, because again, largely people aren't paying attention to the media like people watching this program or a lot of others. Instead, they just see whatever the stories are that the mainstream media focuses on, and that's designed to divide us. But yeah, we're going to get to the story later regarding the Henry Nowak in the UK, and then this other incident that just happened in Northern Ireland with a Somali immigrant, again, trying to decapitate somebody in the street. When you bring the third world in, you become the third world. That's what's happening in Europe. At least they are finally pushing back about it there. But here, this is happening too. It's just not to the same scale yet, but it will get there if we don't do something to stop it. And I just don't see us doing much to prevent it at this point, that we're stopped by judges and whoever else with deportations. We've got to get back on track. And then I just want to give one other example, the violent left. J6 doused with gasoline, violently assaulted by masked Antifa mob at Los Angeles anti-ICE protest. And once again, the police aren't making any arrests. They're not doing anything. They're not taking this incident seriously, even though they were literally threatening to set this guy on fire, this J6 victim of government abuse. But the media doesn't take it seriously. It gets essentially no national attention. They just ignore the story because they can't have their violent rioters cast in a light that would truly show what they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and the J6ers still, I mean, this situation is not over. A lot of people think when Trump pardoned these folks at the beginning of his presidency that was, the final victory, the last scene of the movie. That's not true at all. There are still so many of these people who are getting persecuted and attacked, even in instances like this.
Yeah.
And of course, there were things that were done to these individuals while they were in prison. Their jobs were taken away from them. Perhaps their wife divorced them as a result of them being in jail, whatever the case may be. These are things that, if you want to talk about reparations, right, that would be a more just use of reparations rather than giving somebody's ancestors, some money for something that a whole bunch of dead people did a long time ago, just for example. So
Yeah.
there's still a lot of, weaponization issues that we have to address. And I do think January 6th is at the top of them. And instances like this show that the hatred's still there, the persecution's still there. This is still a massive issue in our country, and we have to fix it. And the president signing his pardons of all these folks on his first day, that was of course significant. It was the right thing to do, but it certainly wasn't the end of this situation.
No, and I think it extends well beyond the J6ers too. Like obviously they deserve to be made whole again, as we've discussed on here numerous times. A lot of them still debanked. That hasn't been fixed.
Yep.
A lot of them are still deplatformed. And there's also the monetary cost. I mean, there's plenty of these guys that spent themselves into poverty and into debt to try to defend themselves before realizing it was a rigged system. You don't have a 100% conviction rate anywhere, except for, I guess, DC, if you're a protester on the right. Then all of a sudden they want to throw the book at you, pull out all the stops, give you the maximum penalty and all that, pretend this, again, is the worst thing to happen in our country since 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or whatever. When nothing could be further from the truth. They ignore the Summer of Love riots. That's obviously what we're heading into again right now. Things are only going to amplify as it continues to get warmer outside, and these protesters emerge from their parents' basement to go burn down your cities once again, try to hold you all hostage. Because again, that is what's happening. That message is already being sent. That's what to expect coming up, and that's the narrative they want to create. That there's mass unrest and panic because of the Trump administration and all the deportations and other things. When again, nothing can be further from the truth. But when you have a dishonest media, this is the result you end up with: is they foment hatred, they foment revolution for the left, and they push this message and they deny reality. But it's pushing us to our breaking point as a country, especially with everything else that we're facing coming up over the next 12 months to 2 years. This can't be allowed to continue. But let's shift over to California. And again, we've been covering this, but it just keeps getting more ridiculous. Steve Hilton advances to California governor general elections, will face Xavier Becerra in November. This makes zero sense. Like, Hilton has been at the top of everybody's polling for basically since this election cycle began in California, for months at the very least. And then suddenly this Democrat that came out of nowhere, that wasn't even polling in third place a few weeks ago, I think even in the week leading up to the election, might be just over a week when he finally moved up the chain to third place. Then to second place right before the election, and now he's in first with a bullet. I just don't understand it. Like, it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. But we'll get more into like the election process in California here in a minute, because this is basically what their voters wanted. This is what they put into law in California, and that's going to make it difficult for some of these federal prosecutions. But it doesn't just end there. It's the mayor's race and everything else. Yeah, let me just go ahead and pull up this next story too regarding the mayor's race in California. Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. There we go. Breaking news: Nithya Raman advances to LA mayoral election against Bass. Spencer Pratt shut out after late mail-in vote surge. Again, this is a ballot surge that doesn't make any sense. The votes that came in on election day kind of reflected about where the polling was. Nithya Raman was ahead of where she should have been, but we can blame that maybe on some mail-in votes. But the problem is, after the first day, the way the numbers shifted don't make any sense. Suddenly, Bass isn't getting any votes. Nithya Raman's taken in nearly 40% of them, and Spencer Pratt's total craters. I mean, there's a whole batch of 14,000 votes where Spencer Pratt got none of them. That does not. That math doesn't math. It doesn't add up. It's impossible. And that's a big part of the problem. Absolutely rigged. Critics question Raman's statistically impossible surge past Pratt in LA mayor's race. As I think we brought up yesterday, this has never happened before. You have never once in all recorded elections in the United States had a third place candidate polling at such low numbers suddenly surge ahead at the last minute. This doesn't reflect the data. And again, the fact that things shift, but this gets into how California conducts their elections.
Yeah. And I've been watching the results of this over and over. And, I was looking at it when it was at 10% of the vote. I was looking at it when it was at 50 to 60%. Now it's 92% of the votes in. And right now, the way it currently stands, as of the 9th of June at 10:30 Central Time, it's Karen Bass, 275,000 votes, Raman at 229,000, and then Pratt at 207,000. Last time I looked, there was only when I looked yesterday, there was about 1,000 votes separating Pratt and Raman. Now it's almost like, gosh, what are we at? It's like 25,000 votes separating them just in the last 24 hours. She's gotten 25,000 extra votes. So it's insane. And you have to remember too, Michael, that Karen Bass had the lowest approval rating of any LA mayor ever, I believe.
Yeah.
So this is not a popular candidate. Raman, I don't live in California, but I didn't hear much about her. I mean, she was obviously mentioned from time to time, but she wasn't a big candidate in the sense that Pratt was. So this is very suspicious. Of course, it's election fraud. The president even said this with Kristen Wilkers on, Meet the Press, talking about that in the big interview the other day that blew up where he walked out in Wisconsin. But, a lot of this does come back to illegal immigration, how many illegal immigrants are voting. I would love to see a reporter go to Skid Row, and if somebody wants to fund my expenses, I'll go do it.
Yeah.
Go to Skid Row and ask, who did you guys vote for in the LA mayor race and see if they voted at all, if they voted for Rahman, if they voted for Bass. That would be very interesting because my guess is none of those people are voting for Pratt. All of the homeless people, a lot of the illegal immigrants, all those people, they voted for Bass or Rahman. And it reeks of election fraud. And
Yeah.
it just shows that just because we had Trump and it was too big to rig and it was, this kind of unusual, unpredictable political circumstance
Yeah.
doesn't mean the country's now red pilled and on the right track. All of our elections, all the way down to these mayoral races, can be rigged, can be influenced. And the, truth of the matter is, unless we get to the bottom of this and fix it, we don't have a republic anymore.
No, and you're exactly right. And, even in California in 2024, we let them steal 5 races, basically using the same tactic. That there were several House races, and now I can't quite remember. I think some of them were just close, but they essentially they pumped them full of ballots. They took 31 days, I think it was, to count all the votes. They found enough votes for the Democrats to surge ahead and suddenly take several seats. Where once again, on election night, the Republican candidate, I shouldn't say conservative because they're in California, but the Republican candidate suddenly falls behind after leading the way. And to your point, on election night, Spencer Pratt was up, I think it was 22,000 votes. It's an insurmountable number. Nikki Rahman even gave her concession speech and all that. Now suddenly she's back up. How did all these late mail-in voters know to vote for Nikki Rahman over Karen Bass? Right. Now, I have no doubt that Bass would have won or would come in first because, again, you have a lot of loyal Democrat automatons. It doesn't matter how many homeless people they have to step over or how many times they have to pull needles or clean poop off their shoes. They're still going to vote blue no matter who, no matter how bad it gets, even if, the mayor burns their house down. But, I think the real danger was allowing Pratt to stay on the ballot, even if it was in a second place finish. He's going to continue to get these viral videos out there. He's going to continue pushing the truth, his narrative about how destructive Democrat policies have been to the city and the state that he loves. And I think the real danger, honestly, I think Karen Bass probably would have won no matter what Spencer Pratt did. I think he would have given her a run for her money, but there's just too many automatons that will continue to vote blue. But I think the real damage and what they're really concerned about is him being out there running his mouth and influencing a lot of other people in California to where Steve Hilton could actually win. That they're like, you know what, this Xavier Becerra, that's if he doesn't end up in jail before the election. His policies are going to be no change and just as bad, and California's going to expect the same, and maybe Hilton gets across the finish line with enough votes that they can't. The margin of victory is greater than the margin of fraud. But the bottom line is the way they administer elections in California is extremely corrupt. That's what we're witnessing here. And I know, we'll get to it in a minute, that the feds are talking about charges, but I don't know what they're going to do there because states administer their own elections, and this very corrupt system was approved, is lawful in California, essentially.
Yeah. Well, obviously there was some sort of a conspiracy to do this and to rig this election. I do think Pratt still has some sort of a chance. I just don't think that this is going to end the way it's, being blackpilled as. I think something's going to happen. I don't know what that is, but he made a very ominous post on social media. I don't know if everyone saw it or not a few days ago. And he said, or maybe it was like yesterday or the day before, it was in the last 48 hours. And basically the, summary of the post was there's other ways for us to find ballots too.
Yes.
So he's not giving up on this. He's not going to throw in the towel. I do think there's a chance he can come around. And again, this is a guy who, and I said this last time I was on the show, is not a traditional Republican, a traditional conservative. He's somebody who can really come in here and win a lot of people over who are leftists. I just found the post. He said, remember, everyone, we are still in the lead and we've got all the way till July 6th to keep counting. They're not the only ones who know where to find votes. So we'll see.
That'd be awesome if he beat them at their own game and everybody knew it, but there was nothing they could do about it. I mean, this is part of the problem is this ballot harvesting is lawful in California. And because, let me go ahead and pull our next story, a couple stories, because this will kind of back up what I'm about to say. Sorry, here we go. California voters California allows voters to register with gem cards, insurance cards, employee ID, none of which verify identity or citizenship, Bill Asaley says. And pull the next one too. Federal election fraud charges coming soon to California. U.S. Attorney Bill Asaley tells Glenn Beck, "We are charging some people." Here's sort of the problem in California. Like, this ballot harvesting is allowed in mass. The signature verification laws are an absolute joke, as you guys have seen, I'm sure, that things circulating around with the scribble and the smiley face that count for the voter and the witness's signature. I know there's other examples floating around. The state has an example on their website of a drawing of Kirby, like the Nintendo character, the little pink little puffball that inhales things. Somebody used that as their signature, and that's lawful. That's on California's Secretary of State's website as an example of a lawful signature of a voter. I mean, again, upside down, backwards, and insane. But to get back to the point I was making, they allow ballot harvesting. So a lot of what's going on is people going into retirement homes, old folks' homes, mental asylums, hospitals, homeless shelters, whatever else, and collecting the ballots and offering to turn them in. And we know the next step there isn't that they're having the person necessarily fill out the ballot, which is what they're arguing. We know they're being handed off to people. They're making their signature. They're signing off as the witness in ways that are illegible. They're filling out the ballot for them and then dropping them off in mass. And this is why, and since they're allowing mail-in ballots with written dates on them rather than a stamped date that it was put in the mailbox and sent in, what they do is on election night, they figure out what are the votes we need, what's the margins that we need to overcome, and then they go out and find those votes from all the people we saw them illegally registering, well, should be illegally registering. In California, all the homeless people, they were getting to request mail-in ballots sent to an address that these Democrat operatives control, and then they're sending them back in. But the way the laws are written in California, it largely is going to protect this. Not to mention, they've made sure it's very difficult to find a trail back to whoever actually committed the fraud unless you catch them in the act. And this is the whole thing. Like, they want to be able to control the elections and determine who you voted for or who you want to lord over you if you are a resident of California.
Yeah, and this whole signature issue is really fascinating too because it's so selective in the enforcement of it across the country. For example, a friend of mine's running for Congress in Florida, and I was talking to him, and he was trying to get enough petitions to get on the ballot. And of course, you have to have these petitions from Republicans, and they're signed, and it has the address of the individual, their mailing address, their signature, their printed signature. And the election, apparatus, the election authority will review those petitions and authenticate the signatures and, deem
Yeah.
if they're acceptable or not. And he was telling me that out of, I think it was maybe 10,000 he needed to get. It was some big number.
Yes.
But out of
10,000.
10,000, they rejected close to 1,000 of his petitions because of the signatures not matching. And he said it was so humorous because when you look at the petitions and the ones they rejected, the signatures were fine. There was no issue with it. And two of the signatures were very prominent county officials who had been in office for many, many years. And, these individuals were somewhat well known, certainly no, stranger to signing documents.
Yeah.
So it's just very bizarre that you see the smiley face, petitions and things or ballots or whatever it is. Those things go through with no issue. And then in a, highly conservative state like Florida with, less competition in this particular race with, like I said, some prominent people signing these petitions, those are thrown out. So it's just crazy the spectrum we see on this. And of course, it's better to be on this side, right, where you are, rejecting some petitions rather than the other side. But the hypocrisy and the lack of consistency is extraordinarily frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the problem. It's the selective enforcement too, where, even in California, I wouldn't be surprised to see them if they had similar, I don't know if it's just pay to get on the ballot in California or signatures or how exactly their laws work there. But, we do see this selective enforcement in a lot of places. I guess Illinois would be a better example where they've had like really harsh reviews for a lot of Republicans that were running for office for collecting their signatures, where, they go through it with a fine tooth comb and then they let Democrats skate through with, they'll be just over the threshold for because I think it varies there by, I don't remember if it's county or district or whatever. And sorry if I have the details wrong on that, but they'll let them skate through. They'll need 6,000 signatures. They'll turn in 6,004 and suddenly be fine. Whereas you have to know, normally the rule is if you have to collect signatures and you're a candidate running for office, that you need 10% more than the required amount, because some are going to be struck, and sometimes it's for legitimate reasons. The person moved, never updated their address, put the wrong address down, or other things where they just forgot. And you're going to have other ones where, again, the signature doesn't quite match or whatever. But the Democrat will skate through with barely over the minimum requirement. Republicans will show up with 4,000 extra signatures. They need 6,000, but the level of scrutiny is totally different, where they're rejecting, half their signatures there and, demanding they go out and get more. Whereas, somehow the Democrat just miraculously, everything they had worked out and lined up just fine. There were no discrepancies there whatsoever. No even mistakes. And it just, again, everybody knows this isn't how reality works, but we're supposed to believe it. And it's just to the point where it's unacceptable. Something has to be done in California and a lot of these blue states where they are stealing your elections. They're stealing the will of the people, even if they're doing it under the cover of law, because they have laws written that allow for this type of fraud manipulation. That's what has to be changed. And that's why we, unfortunately, do need the SAVE Act. We do need other measures, from the federal level, forcing them to administer their elections in a free, fair, and honest way, because this is unacceptable. I mean, they talk a lot about our democracy and protecting our democracy. I mean, this is the opposite of that. This is overriding the will of the people so that you can get your selected candidate on. It's banana republic bullshit.
Yeah, it certainly is. And again, if we don't fix this, nothing else matters, right? Because you're not going to be able to get your economic relief or your, foreign policy you want or whatever your pet project is if you can't vote in people who, align with your political viewpoint. So you
Yep.
rig the elections, and this is nothing new. Like, we know that even back in Kennedy's election, Kennedy's dad was kind of a mobster and helped rig the election against Nixon. Like, this stuff has happened.
Yeah.
At least all election fraud's bad, right? But at least that was Americans rigging elections
Yeah.
against Americans. This is a foreign world issue, It's so you got these illegal immigrants, you got APAC, you got all this stuff that's outside of the United States that's influencing our elections. So that makes it even worse. That'd be a funny T-shirt. Let's make our elections rigged by Americans again.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. That I can tolerate. I can tolerate American criminals. Well, not tolerate. It still needs to be enforced. But yeah, I would much rather it's people here doing the rigging and not, foreign country. This is another one that kills me. We freak out over $100,000 of Russian spending on Facebook ads, but then we look the other way when we have millions and millions of dollars coming in, influencing a lot of these races with AIPAC. Another thing that conservatives forget is they're still giving almost as much money to Democrats as they are Republicans. It isn't like we suddenly have the advantage there. We're just ignoring the fact that they're doing the same on the other side, that it's just increased spending all the way around. But I guess we're just totally blind to that fact or don't want to acknowledge it. Maybe that's anti-Semitic to even bring it up, for all I know. But it's time for a palate cleanser. We need some good news. So just in, Ohio State Senate passes bill to put voter ID amendment on November ballot. Trump responds. This obviously, just like throughout the rest of the country, this polls well. Even a majority of Democrats are in favor of stricter voter ID laws and stricter requirements before you vote, and going through our voter rolls, pulling off all the dead people and illegal aliens, other people that shouldn't be voting in our elections, or people that just moved and forgot to change their address. So this is going to sail through. And yes, of course, here the Democrats and the left are already freaking out about it. I guess Amy, what's her name? Amy Acton's already got a statement out about how this will suppress minority votes or whatever nonsense. But again, this is common sense. We have to know who you are. If you have to show an ID to buy a beer or, get on an airplane or even walk into a federal building, you should have to show an ID to vote. This is common sense. But pretending it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, this is in line with what I was saying on the show a few appearances ago, which is that the states really need to, take the mantle on this SAVE Act issue. And, one of the key points for that argumentation is enforcement. If the federal government passes the SAVE Act, how exactly are they going to enforce that, right? Of course, you assume the states are going to, adopt that sort of adherence to
Yeah.
it. But when you have something like this, where it's in Ohio or Florida, which Florida's done similar, and you pass your own statewide SAVE Act through the legislature, that is so much more localized. It's so much more potent, and it's so much more easier to enforce. And I think that this is the solution. It's faster. The states can do it and tailor it to their own needs while still addressing the same issues. And then, like I said, there's a sort of camaraderie around it, in so much as the people are voting on it. Perhaps you have the state legislatures who are supporting it. They're, of course, in contact with their constituency. It's just more grassroots, is the argument I'm trying to make. And I think that it will have more efficacy if done through the states. And I think that's also the constitutional answer to it. So I'm very happy to see this. All Republican states, which, if you go by the 2024, electoral map, is a majority. If
Yeah.
all of those Republican states did this, I think we would see a massive, massive positive upswing in election results around the country,
Yeah.
because we just followed common sense voting measures.
Yeah, I think the problem you run into though is it's all the blue states that aren't going to comply in all the elections that will continue to be stolen there. I mean, that's the real problem why, unfortunately, I think the federal solution is the only one that makes sense right now. That I think in the long run you could have states impose similar laws, but it's almost like we have to give the blue states an enema. We have to get rid of all the poison, get that out of there by forcing them to have more lawful elections, more honest elections, because I think they'll still find ways to bend the rules, allow their illegal aliens and other people to vote. But I mean, some of this stuff, like, I'm sure you guys are sick of me saying this, but like, it's impossible for states like Wisconsin to have more people on the voter rolls than live in the state. That just doesn't
Right.
that doesn't add up. We know that there is a lack of compliance, and it's intentional in a lot of these blue states. And that's again how I think a lot of this election fraud, election theft happens, is they know who a lot of these people that are on the rolls that shouldn't be are, and wouldn't you know it, they all need mail-in ballots, and they're all sent to the same addresses and then intercepted, and then somebody just votes for them, the right way, the way the state needs them to vote. Oh man, I want to sneak this in here real quick. I meant to bring this up earlier with LA, but I forgot because I didn't have an actual article for this. But this is something else I'd heard this morning. That did part of something else that was on the ballot in LA was this increase to the sales tax, and as you would expect, the votes they counted within the first 24 hours of the election, it went down in a resounding defeat. But wouldn't you know it, all these Democrats that love to vote early and mail in their ballots, they came to the rescue to make sure your sales tax would get increased there in LA. It went from being like a 60-40 against to, squeaking across the finish line. That you guys, you need to thank all your Democrat overlords because they made sure you guys didn't make a mistake and shoot down this sales tax.
Right. Absolutely ridiculous. The taxes are, just that's always where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
Is with the tax issue. So, yeah, no surprise there. There has been encouraging, just to pivot for a short pivot, been encouraging developments on this, where you have Missouri, Ohio, Florida, a handful of states, debating this property tax issue.
Yes.
In Florida, we now have on the ballot in November an amendment, which is a great amendment, and the ballot language is fantastic. I read it the other day, that would exempt the first $150,000 of your home's assessed value from property taxes, the January 1st of 2027, and then the next year that would go up $100,000 to 250. So the first 250 would be exempt. That covers about 80% of Florida's homes, and then after that, by 2029, they're going to consider expanding that to go up to 500,000, which would then
That's
include like
awesome.
95% of the homes. So it's really positive. Ohio, Missouri, all these other states need to do the same thing. They're talking about it. But that's the solution to, I think, this affordability issue, is local tax reform. I really do believe in that. I think that could fix a lot of these issues if people can own their homes. If they can keep more of their income, get rid of personal property taxes, get rid of state income tax, That sort of stuff's really important. And it may seem like, oh, well, that's just small potatoes, it's not that much money. But if you look at how much property taxes is a year, and then you look at how much, personal property taxes, state income tax, it can be into the, category of thousands. You might be
Yeah.
able to save a single family, let's just say, for example, $3,000 a year. That's not nothing. So there is some encouraging news on that tax front with affordability in more Midwestern and Southern states.
Yeah, and that's the direction we need to go. We need to cut off the resources that government's reaching into your pocket to steal any way we can, especially when they're such bad stewards with the money. A lot of this is nonsense that people believe regarding taxes and how the money's spent. They think, oh, it goes to the schools and the roads and all this. When a lot of that, yeah, maybe part of it does out of the gas tax, but a lot of it, as we pointed out in different states, including here in Ohio, where like they've spent money out of the gas tax fund to build sculptures along the highway. That's not a necessity. Now, at the local area, if they want to put up a monument around the highway, like we have one here near where I live, that I think it was the city of Vandalia paid for, that was a monument to inventing flight. The Wright brothers are from here in Dayton, so blah, blah, blah. It's a big thing around here. So the city paid to put up a thing alongside the highway there. Now, that I'm fine with. The local residents want to do it and they want to pay for it. That's all well and good. But when you're taking stealing from the coffers that are supposed to go to repairing roads and building highways to instead finance somebody's pet project for essentially the same thing, some monument or beautification project or whatever along the roads, then that's misusing your funds. The government should be doing the bare minimum. They should be doing just what's necessary to keep the state functioning and going, the things that the people want. The rest of this stuff, you can have private charities or entities or individuals finance it if they want to have, a beautification project, build a sculpture, whatever. We've got to be better stewards of the people's money. But I mean, the bigger demon is the federal government there for reaching to your pocket and using it to fund drag shows in Lesotho or their pet projects or finance NGOs that their spouses sit on the board of. And this is where this stuff just has to go. We have to change people's expectation of what government does for them and get back into something that is. It's going to take a long time to get back into the restraints of the Constitution, but I think we can get there slowly, step by step. If you start, again, show people both the savings it would give them, the value it brings them, and restoring government once again. Otherwise, this country is cooked in the long run.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. And of course, federal income tax, that is unconstitutional. That's got to go.
Yeah.
We have to get our gold, back up. We have to have gold backed currency. We have to end the Federal Reserve. It's not federal. It's not a reserve. It's a complete
Yeah.
scam. These are things that have to happen. And you're right. It's the federal element of this that's the true, behemoth,
Parasite.
because you don't necessarily, yeah, it's the parasite, because you don't necessarily have, your state income tax going to USAID or, to fund some,
Yeah.
NPR nightmare in Afghanistan or whatever. It's not what's happening at the state level to the same order of magnitude as the feds. But we have more control and it's easier to do it at the state level. And that's, a good start. And then it kind of has this cascading effect. So a long story short, if you live in Florida, vote yes in November on that property tax amendment and send a message to the rest of the country that that is an actually feasible step in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think a lot of it is we just have to change people's perception of what government pays for and does for everyone. That get them back restraint under control. That a lot of this is just pure waste. It's fraud. It's abuse. It's people using your wallet to either enact their ideas or line their own pocket. And we've got to end that once and for all. It's time for us to move the ball forward instead of constantly being on the defensive. We've talked about that a lot of times. We have to start executing our agenda, and we also have to start getting out ahead of the left to make sure that their little fever dream pet projects like this 30 by 30 thing where they want 30% of the land of the United States to be off limits, where you can't walk on it, can't do anything. It's just a permanent reserve for Mother Nature. And 50 by 50, half the land in the country, they want that. So why we ought to force the feds to sell their holdings, their assets that aren't on military bases or other things where it has actual strategic value, or they buy up the land for a toxic waste spill. Anything that's outside of that, we need to force them to sell back to the American people, because again, this will cause building booms. This will cause people to leave the cities and spread out. It'll cause more independence. But we've got to start actually pushing our agenda forward instead of constantly being on defense. I guess I should get back on track here and back to Minnesota, where, again, confirmation is something we all already knew. House report finds Minnesota officials ignored fraud to avoid racism accusations. And we also have this confirmed. Governor Tim Walz and AG Keith Ellison knew for 6 years rampant Minnesota fraud, but said nothing in order to keep the Somali votes. You got to keep those clearing centers going. You got to keep the Somali pirates happy, because that is now what the political economy in Minnesota runs on.
Yeah, it goes back to the race politics too, that you look the other way, you allow this minority to continue doing what they're doing, even if it's illegal, because you need to keep that pressure, you need to keep that voting block. And it doesn't matter if what they're doing is illegal, it doesn't matter if it's immoral. You are going to, break the law if necessary, if you're Tim Walz or Keith Ellison, to keep that vote, keep that tension, suppress white people and heritage Americans,
Yeah.
and uplift these Somalians and these illegal immigrants who are coming here and doing the leering centers, because that's the direction they want to head, and they don't care about legality. They're the ones talking about civil rights, and they're the ones talking about individual liberties, and yet the tax paying Americans are having their individual liberties and their civil rights compromised by people who aren't even citizens of this country, who haven't,
Yeah.
invested their lives in paying taxes, their lives in building businesses, and things of that nature. So Keith Ellison and Tim Walz, they represent truly a treasonous, traitorous wing and sect of this nation. They're a disgrace, and we can never forget that sort of betrayal. And these guys should be shamed. I mean, they should never see the light of day again in politics. I mean, their career should be over. They should
Yeah.
be removed. I mean, where's the outrage? I mean, I know they suspended their campaign. I know Tim Walz did that, but that's lightweight, right? I mean, this is impeachable to say the least.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. I think that I hope they can find enough information to solidly connect Tim Walz to it. I know they've got his lieutenant governor dead to rights, it sounds like, with foreknowledge of what was going on, but they need to be prosecuted for sedition, because again, this was your money going to support foreign nationals here that are not assimilating. They're not here to become Americans, and then they were sending the money back home to essentially finance Somalia. They had more money coming from the United States through Somali fraud than the actual GDP of Somalia. It's upside down and backwards. They knew this was going on for years. They should be tried for sedition and then locked up where they never see the light of day ever again. They deserve to die in prison. And we've got to start getting serious about this kind of stuff instead of just allowing it to continue to happen. We've, again, talked about it ad nauseum. I'm glad that they're arresting the Somali pirate fraudsters up there and in Ohio and other places. That's great that we're starting to see that happen. But what we really need are the political appointees and elected officials and just, I guess, general bureaucrats that knew this was going on and looked the other way. In any of them that were warned where it's prosecutable, we need to go after them and really come down with a hammer. Send the message that this won't be tolerated anymore, because otherwise it's going to continue. I mean, the fraud totals keep climbing everywhere. There's aren't any instances where they're going in, they start to investigate, and then find out, what, this was all legitimate, or what, only 2 or 3% of this was fraud. The rest of it was legitimate. No, I mean, they're finding, some of these programs. I mean, it's insane where they have 30+% of people participating in them were doing so fraudulently. And again, just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't even gone through everything yet to really know the total scope of this program, but I wouldn't be at all surprised to see it's 50% of some of these programs were fraudulent recipients of your tax dollars. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. And, again, if this is fraud in Minnesota, and we've seen this, what about the fraud in California? What about the fraud in New York? What about the fraud in Chicago? What about the fraud in, Kansas City and Miami? So this is all over the place. And JD Vance, he's our fraud czar. He's our fraud guy. Okay, JD, we're ready. Impress us. Where's the juice? Where's the bacon? Yet to be seen.
Yeah, well, that's a big part of the problem is, we have these expectations of them actually doing something to tackle this problem, but it's just not happening. they can talk about it, they can do investigations all they want, and this is kind of the point I was going to make earlier with this, or with this exact story. Like, I'm glad the House released this report, but it's what we already knew. We knew this was going on. This doesn't change anything. What I want is people being frog marched in handcuffs and held accountable. I want mass deportations of these fraudsters. I want to, claw back any of the money that we can, and then we should send them back to Somalia. I don't even want them in our prisons because that's going to cost us even more money in the long run. And, just sending them back to Somalia, at least it solves the problem. We don't have to spend any more money. And then make sure they can never enter the United States again. If they're caught here again, it ought to just be an immediate lead aspirin. Because we've got to make the cost so high to come back here illegally. Because then that's the other problem is we see these stories over and over again. We're like, oh, this is the 25th time this guy violated, broke into the country and did whatever. But, we're just going to put him to jail for 6 months for that again. Nope, doesn't work. There's too many perverse incentives to come back to the United States. Speaking of that, which, Obama judge blocks Trump's $100,000 per year H-1B visa fee. And, this is something I really think is a brilliant idea because I am somebody that thinks, we have about just under a million H-1B visas here in the U.S. The vast majority of those are fraudulent. They should not be here. We don't need janitors. We don't need programmers. We don't need jobs that Americans can already do. And there's plenty of people that have the skills to do so. I mean, we're paying freaking receptionists are here on H-1B visas. Don't tell me you can't find an American to be a receptionist at your company. That's an outright lie. But I think this is pretty smart because there are some positions like, robotics engineers, things like that we do have actual shortages of. Now, like I said before, different people I talked to have given me different numbers, but we'll say it's 25 to 50,000 people that as of right now. But even then, that should be on a temporary basis. And what I liked the idea was using this $100,000 fee to then incentivize some colleges or some students, with loan incentives or grants or whatever else to go through, get the education to do the jobs where we're having to bring in foreign nationals to do them. But of course, once again, we can't have a good idea or we can't have something that would be positive for America. I don't even understand quite what this judge's justification was for this, because again, this is something that's clearly in the purview of the president of the office to determine immigration and fees and everything else associated with it. It doesn't require a congressional act in this case, but I guess these judges will just find something that fits their agenda.
Yeah. I think you and I are pretty close on this issue, but I think you and I would disagree on this is that H-1B visa, I think, the requirement, if memory serves me correct, is that, an H-2B visa is, basically non-specialty work. But an H-1B is specialty work in so much as they have to have like a bachelor's degree or an equivalent.
Yeah.
And but the problem with that is that I think H-1B visas, because of that, get this sort of spin where people say, well, it's not, H-1B visas coming over here and taking, entry level American jobs. These are specialized workers, et cetera. But then you look at the fraud and you look at where these guys are getting hired, and it's, Amazon and they're,
Yes.
some sort of warehouse person, or it's Microsoft and there's some sort of paper pusher or whatever. And it's like these people aren't Einsteins coming over here, Operation
No.
Paperclip. And I know that's not what you're saying per se, but that I think is the kind of debate people have. And they say, well, we need these people, this, that, and the other. I think that there's so much fraud in it. That it would probably be best if we just paused it and had a moratorium on H-1Bs for a while.
Yes.
Maybe not kiss it goodbye forever, but you have to do something because it's going to take so much time and effort to weed out the legitimate good faith H-1Bs versus the fraudulent ones that perhaps you just do that. And people say, well, that's cruel. That's this, that, and the other. Well, it's not an immigration plan. It's an
Yeah.
employment plan. It's contingent on, them not being a citizen. That's the whole point of the program. Otherwise, it would be unnecessary. Coming here is a privilege, not a right. No one's entitled to it. Only Americans are because it's our blood right. And
Yeah.
that's the end of the story. So if it's no longer in our interest, and I would argue that it isn't, that then we need to do the moratorium. And the problem is it's not just the Obama judges that are pushing back on this. And I agree with Trump's $100,000 plan, by the way. I think it's a good step.
Yes.
But because that would knock out a lot of the fraud, I think, because the point behind all this is that these big tech companies, OpenAI, Microsoft, Intel, Palantir, et cetera, their whole business model is based on having slave Indian labor. That's what they
Yes.
ultimately want. The Silicon Valley mafia, the Mark Andreessens, the Peter Thiels, these types, they want to have basically a slave army of Indian laborers that would take far less cash than an American citizen would, where they
Hmm.
can handle, their employment in any way they want because they can dangle their passport or their H-1B visa, issue or their green card over their head, and they basically want little serfs, and
Yes.
that's why they don't want to give this up. And I think that an H-1B moratorium would be probably the best, method. Get this under control, figure out who's the good ones, who are the bad ones, and then once it's all sorted out, reintroduce it, perhaps qualify it a little bit more to really fit the needs we want. Because like an American can't go and work in any part of the foreign world on a work program unless it's like something that particular country really wants or really needs. They're all super
Correct.
selective. And yet we're letting Indians come over and work at Amazon or work at Timu, and it's under H-1B, but they're just stole some job from some college kid, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, they're freaking forklift operators in the Amazon
Right.
warehouse. But, I do think that you could probably eliminate 90% of these, leaving 100,000 to then sort through by hand if you just got rid of certain job codes, if you got rid of every programmer, if you got rid of every receptionist, every janitor, every whatever. You could probably eliminate 90% of these and just send them back home, which again, the State Department has the discretion to do. They can pull an H-1B visa at any time for any reason. Um, and then we could probably sort through the remaining 100,000 and get rid of 75,000 of them that were also in positions that should no longer be qualified, or there's plenty of Americans. Because, yeah, to your point, a lot of these companies that we've covered before, they skirt the laws that are meant to protect Americans. When they run an ad for the job for 3 months or whatever the requirement is, again, I can't remember if it's 3 months or 6 months before applying for an H-1B candidate. They have to run advertisements. Well, they'll do it in a non-English speaking paper in a small town somewhere that has a circulation of 200 people. Like, wow, nobody replied in the Czech Daily Standard newspaper in Walla Walla, Washington. So I guess we're going to have to hire somebody from India. They're skirting the laws. And again, I think the company should be penalized for that. But I also think the $100,000 fee is brilliant because, to your point, a company will only do this in the case where they really need that employee. They really need that robotics engineer or that specialist, and they've gone through recruiters, they've run their own ads, they've tried hard to fill this position, and they just can't do it. And I don't think that'll be because of salary or anything else, because these are the kind of positions that they cost the company more money leaving it unfilled than they spend on the salary, by and large. Again, probably not all of them. There's probably some weird specialized roles that these people struggle to fill. But I mean, that's the point of the program. It is for the few jobs as a nation that we're not able to fill with our own people, either because of massive growth, educational problems, or whatever. So, the rest of these visa programs should largely just disappear. I think I always forget the code for it, but the extreme talent, the one for like geniuses and star athletes, stuff like that, we want to leave that open. You want the best of the best globally, and that's a very, very small number of overall visas. That's your NBA stars, your fusion scientists, people like that. But the rest of these, they got to go. We don't need the labor. Maybe a small amount of farm workers, and even that, we should come up with ways. They used to bus people from the cities out to the farms to work during that season, put them up in temporary housing, and that's how we filled the jobs, is with Americans that were otherwise unemployed. We've got to go back to systems that work, that support Americans, but occasionally there may be a time to reach out here and there for a very, 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 very small number of people, and that's why we've got to start treating this stuff again, not an open ticket for all your buddies in India to come over here and work in the United States.
Yeah. I think the extreme talent, is that the O1 visa?
I think that is the O1. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's for mega talent, the Einsteins, the Martin Scorseses, the Michael Jordans. But this has just become such a big issue. Even in local politics, you're seeing, Kevin Lon, who was just the victor in Iowa's gubernatorial primary. He ran on, restricting this H-1B visa issue that was very large campaign pillar of his. James Fishback in Florida, again, running on the H-1B visa issue. I know that Mark Lynch, who of course is facing Lindsey Graham, shout out to Mark Lynch. Today's the day, primary in South Carolina. If you're in
Yes.
South Carolina, please vote for Mark Lynch over Lindsey Graham. Save a lot of lives and a lot of
Yeah.
baby oil if we get him out. So that would be fantastic. And but that is becoming a big campaign point in Republican politics now, is the H-1B visa program. And I think it's because young people in particular are feeling the consequences of this, where they become, some sort of a professional. Maybe they have an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, they're in college, whatever the case may be. And they're trying to apply for jobs and they're throwing out 50, 100. I've even heard somebody say they've sent out 150 job applications for something that 25 years ago would have been easy to get in, but now they
Yeah.
can't because they're hiring, Indians, they're hiring Pakistanis, they're automating with AI, whatever the case may be. And we're just seeing a discrimination against Americans, against, American citizens, humans, even at large, because of AI. So I do think that this needs to be addressed. I think the moratorium is the best idea. And ultimately, I am convinced that there are enough Americans. There's this notion that, well, if we don't have the illegals, if we don't have the Indians, who's going to pick the cucumbers? Who's going to work at Amazon? Who's going to, tend to the
Well,
strawberry patch? And it's like, that's a slavery style mindset. It's like,
yeah.
Americans, there's enough of us. Look at the unemployment numbers. Look at these people who want jobs. Like, let's just try Americans, who are available to do these works, and see if that fills the gap. And if it doesn't, then retool the H-1B program after you now know where the gaps are to fill them. That just, to me, seems the most common sense approach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even with the farm labor, a lot of it's the wages. I watched some little mini documentary on this just a couple weeks ago, and they were talking to a few different people that own farms in whatever city this was, in, I don't know, Iowa, Idaho. I can't quite remember. I think it was Idaho, actually. And one of them just raised the wages from $15 an hour or $14 an hour, whatever their competitor was, to 20, and they had to increase the prices to their clients in order to compensate for that added wage. But suddenly, all their 100 and however many openings were filled within a few days. People were lining up with applications. It was Americans, and that was just they wanted to cut out essentially sponsoring illegal alien labor and illegal migrants here on the farms. So they decided to do something about it, and a lot of their clients were happy to go along with it. And the other lady's then losing her mind about her farms, like, well, we can't afford to pay that. I mean, I might be able to go from 14 to 15, but that's just not how it works. We love our illegal, or we love our migrant farmers, I think is what she kept saying. But, it really, again, what they want is slaves. They want people working at subpar wages. And, again, it's we have when you artificially depress the cost of something by using illegal slave labor, that's not good. We know that anywhere else, it gets said all the time when it comes to China. Oh, they're using slave labor to produce this, and that's why they can sell you this widget for half what it costs to make in America. So if it's bad when China does it, it's obviously bad when we do it too. But unfortunately, again, you've got a lot of these wealthy blue bloods that think it's okay when they do it because it helps line their pocket.
Yep. And ultimately, too, you have this, narrative that goes around about, well, the Mexican people, they just work harder than, immigrants do jobs Americans won't. And, Americans won't work. It's like, okay, is that maybe true at a macro level? If you look at some individuals, yes. But writ
Yeah.
large, I don't think it is. Look at Mexico and look at America. Who has the skyscrapers? Who has the steel manufacturing? Who has the oil? Who has the output? Who has the power? Who has the military? Who has the Boeing and the Lockheed Martin and the Ford Motor Company and the Chevy and all these different things? It's Americans.
Yeah.
Americans built the free world. Americans built, the city of New York. The Americans built LA. And are there some immigrant, contributions to that? Yes.
Yeah.
But writ large, this notion that immigrants work harder than Americans, it's insulting, and I think it's untrue.
Yeah, I agree. Again, you can definitely find some individual cases, especially of lawful immigrants that come here and just really hustle,
Yes.
that become highly successful. But that's also the way our system is designed, the way it's supposed to be, is bringing the best of the best, not the dependents from around the world. So yes, you are going to have success at a high rate of people that lawfully immigrate here because, again, it's not easy. If you're coming here from a foreign country, you're learning the language, and you want to be a success here, you don't want to be a dependent here, it's going to be hustlers. It's going to be people that come over that really do some hard work. Now, I talked about this before, like my ex's family. Her father immigrated here legally, and then built up a bunch of businesses here. But he was already somebody that was successful back where he came from in South America. And he came here, and then now he had opportunity, and he built up several companies in Central Florida that way. So, or even my uncle, same thing. Immigrated here from Brazil, built up restaurants, and was successful because it's highly motivated people. But that's what it's designed for. We're supposed to be not bringing in dependents. We're supposed to be bringing in a small number of people, the best of the best from around the world, that will add to America, will build us up, not form a dependency class that is based around whatever race or religion they are, that does not assimilate into the country. That needs to go out the window. We need to go back to an immigration system that actually works for Americans. But honestly, I think we need to probably cut off all immigration for 10 to 20 years, except for maybe some emergency cases here and there. I think we can keep that under 10,000. There's probably some times where we can rescue, some South African farmers that are otherwise going to be murdered that will come here and contribute, or other people with similar cases around the world. But that should be kept to a minimum. 10,000. We'll go 25,000 per year, and they have to assimilate. And any of them come here that fail, that become dependent on the taxpayers for their day-to-day life, well, guess what? You got to go home, go back to Somalia or wherever, and go create a Leering Center and make Somalia great again.
Yeah. Immigration moratoriums, bare minimum. I've used the example before. If you have a body that's hemorrhaging blood and it goes into the ER, and the person's overweight and they have cataracts, you're not going to say, hey, let's get them on a treadmill. Let's take them to the, optical surgeon and see if we can, get rid of these cataracts. You're going to stop the bleeding. That's the first thing. And then you can handle the other stuff down the line. Same is true with immigration. You have to have the moratorium, stop the bleeding, right? Secure the border, build the wall, actually have a surveilled southern border. Step one. And then you have to get the 20 plus million illegals out of here. And, I've made the case, and people don't like this, but I do think it is. I don't know what the other solution is. I don't like it either, but I don't know what the other solution is we're going to have to implement some sort of a national militaristic style campaign across the United States to find these people and deport them. It's not fun, but if we're willing to send our military to Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq, halfway around the world, because people are chanting death to America and want to destroy us. So they tell us if that's justified to put boots on the ground, why would it not then be justified to put boots on the ground in our own country when we have 20 plus million people in our own borders within the gates who are actually hurting people and serve as a national security threat? So you're going to have to handle that. And who knows, maybe Trump towards the end of his presidency will finally kick it into full gear, but that's yet to be seen.
Oh, well said. And Andrew, thank you for joining. You guys, you can find Andrew's work over at the New American and the Liberty Sentinel. He puts up some great articles. Make sure you check them out. And you can watch Andrew's program, American Made, every Saturday at 5 p.m. right here on X American News. So again, thank you for joining today. To our audience, thank you for being here with us. Please like, share, and subscribe. Help us to grow so we can bring more people the news the mainstream media doesn't want you to hear. I'll be back.